You are here because Keir Starmer has announced an investigation into foreign election interference following the conviction, of course, of Nigel Farage's close friend, protégé and former leader of Reform UK in Wales for accepting bribes to promote Russian interests in the European Parliament. Before we get into the likelihood of this achieving what we would both like to see it achieve, what was your sort of initial reaction to the announcement? Do we file it under better late than never, or were you more cynical than that?
I think I kind of a bit of both. I think better late than never. I think this is an issue that we've long known we need to look at. We had the Russia report that came out from the Intelligence Select Committee years ago. We will remember, I'm sure we talked about it on this show. Eventually it came out. It did cast a lot of questions about the Brexit referendum. Nothing was done, nothing to see here. So in some respects, good to see something happening. I do wish it hadn't been done in this very nakedly partisan political way. I think that's a real problem. I think it's going to damage its credibility. You know, it's clearly aimed at reform, and already that's the way it's been interpreted by a lot of people, not just say on GB News. I think that is unfortunate. It's a problem, and that was kind of inevitable. And we know that these are all issues. They were issues before Nathan Gill was convicted, and they remain issues now. So I think it is unfortunate the government's been, not for the first time, slightly dragged to this place.
Yeah, I mean, is that, if they'd announced it before the conviction of Nathan Gill, it would have landed very differently from announcing it afterwards. And yet, I suppose if they were here to defend themselves, they'd say, well, you know, we've had a major British politician jailed for taking bribes from a Kremlin stooge. Obviously, we have to find out whether or not this conduct extends further.
Yeah, and I think that's a good part of this. But as I say, we've known that foreign interference is a problem in British politics. And frankly, we've known that our general political architecture is just not fit for practice for a very, very long time. The government knows it. That's why they brought forward an election bill. And so it's good to see it. It's good to see it's happening. But as I say, I think given how strong Labour was about these issues in opposition, it hasn't really delivered in government. You know, it talked so much about Tory sleaze in its manifesto. It talked about reforming political donations, etc. And they haven't really done very much so far. But as we say, at least we're here, we're talking about it, something's going to happen. It looks like it's going to happen quite quickly in terms of a report. It should be out by March. So we will have something at least to talk about with some sort of concrete detail in it.
And where do you want them to look? What should they be looking at and what should they be looking for, Peter?
Well, so what they've said is they're going to look at political finance and they're going to look at our laws around political finance and see whether they're strong enough and robust enough. They're going to look at potential listed contributions into things like cryptocurrency, the funding of third-party campaigns. They're going to look at things like the Electoral Commission and its independence. These are all well and good, but I think they don't go far enough. There's a number of big things, big ticket items that are missing here, really. One is we have a political system in which you can give unlimited amounts of money to people. So we had it last week. Christopher Harborne, who's perfectly entitled to give money, he gave £9 million to Reform. It's the biggest political donation by someone who's living in the biggest numerical donation. He's a Thai-based multimillionaire. That's totally allowed. During how that money is spent, we won't actually ever know because we only have spending caps and reported spending during general election years. Okay. So that's another big, massive loophole. Our lobbying system is a total joke. Anyone can walk through it. We did a big undercover investigation recently led by Donkeys, which showed how easy and cheap it was to buy political access for just $5,000. We posed as a fake Chinese company. We were able to meet 10 MPs and a couple of government ministers. That's a big problem. And actually coming on top of all of this, one of the biggest ways in which we have foreign interference, particularly from Russia, but from others, is online and through social media. And that's where a lot of this is happening. And this isn't really going to even touch the sides on it. It looks like that's only going to be part of the conversation on this.
What explains the reluctance? Because, I mean, you mentioned the work that you've done. You mentioned led by Donkeys. Byline Times, of course, have also done sterling work on this. Sergei Christo himself, a whistleblower on very obvious, very naked attempts by Russian diplomats, in his case, to infiltrate or influence the Conservative Party. Why wouldn't there be a greater desire, a greater appetite from a Labour government to look into all of this? Could it be because they're frightened of other things that might emerge?
I think my general kind of Occam's razor approach on this, what's the most likely outcome is, what I've always found is basically a general election is 650 mini general elections. So every MP in Parliament has won their own little general election. So they know how this system works. They think it's broken, most of them. They think it's really bad. We incentivise politicians, because we have unlimited donations, we incentivise politicians to get into positions where effectively, if access isn't been sold, some suggestion is always going to be hanging around. So we kind of incentivise scandals, which is a very bad way. It feeds this massive distrust in our politics. So even on that level, it's bad. But part of the problem is every party that's won a general election for a very long time has taken in more money than anybody else. It happened last time with the Labour Party, because everyone saw the Tories. The Tories' donations in the short campaign were down 90% on the 2019 general election, 9-0, because people just abandon parties that look like they're about to lose power. So parties that are in power often think, we know how this system works. We can, the money side of it, we can make it work.
So this is a bit like the system is bad, but it can't be that bad because we just won.
Pretty much that. And we know how to win, so it'll work again. It's a very cynical perspective.
Yeah.
It's one of the most cynical aspects of our politics. And I think it opens up our politics to huge, huge problems and huge potential of this kind of foreign interference. And unless there's a willingness to do something about those big things, I do worry that this inquiry is going to find, it's not going to be able to do the kind of...
that is the danger of those of us that have been following this more closely than most, is the danger of enhanced expectation, isn't it? So, for example, the Russia report published in 2020, when it was finally published in 2020 from the Intelligence and Security Committee, that line about MI5 actively avoiding looking for evidence that Russia interfered in our democracy should have been, broadcast from Piccadilly Circus in 30-foot-high neon lights, shouldn't it? Under Johnson, the security service actively avoiding looking for evidence that Russia interfered in our democracy. And then Johnson coming out and doing a lap of honour, crowing about the fact that they hadn't found any evidence of Russia interfering in our democracy. So an extraordinary juxtaposition of positions. So those of us who would be desperate for MI5 to have a better look for evidence that Russia interfered in our democracy are unlikely to be satisfied with this inquiry. It's not going to sort of revisit or relitigate some of those rather obvious potential scandals in our very recent past.
No, it's not, frankly. I think that's a huge failing. And exactly that. If you don't look for evidence, surprise, surprise, you're not going to find it. Yeah. And the police are constantly... And I actually can understand the police's position, because no one wants to get involved in politics. So it needs political leadership to do that. And unfortunately, as I say, there's a turkeys voting for Christmas aspect to this. But all it does is feed distrust and feed mistrust of our politics, which is what the government says it cares more than anything else about. So if you really care about it, I think there's a real... And there's an opportunity for an elections bill coming. So it's not like we have to, this is already happening. And at the moment, from what we're hearing about this elections bill, they're going to be very technocratic small changes that people like me who are in the weeds will talk about and think about. But actually the big picture isn't there. And that's why the government needs to act far more significantly. And perhaps this inquiry will provide the kind of ammunition that the government needs. But it only will do that, and it only will work if the government is willing to actually sit down and take a hard look at it and make some big decisions.
Yeah, it's a neat explanation that of why perhaps they aren't. For people, again, who aren't as across the facts or the recent events as you are, just let me steer you back to something else they won't be looking at properly. What would, to the uninitiated, how would you best describe what has almost certainly happened with regard to social media interference and influence? How Russian-sponsored actors have, if you like, poisoned the well of public discourse in this country?
Well, we know this has been happening now for a very long time. It's for over 10 years. The Internet Research Agency working out of St. Petersburg initially, and now we are seeing just incredible number of bot accounts, incredible number of pushing of, and what's fascinating about is pushing multiple messages that are basically there to sow discord and sow division. And that's been happening since before the Brexit referendum. We know that. And it's been supercharged. It's been supercharged for two reasons. One of the reasons is just more of it's happening. AI is also changing the game on this. this. You can do this. Before you had to have physical people sitting in St. Petersburg or in troll farms in Macedonia doing this stuff. You actually don't even need real people to do it anymore. You can do it all with AI. But at the same time, the tech barons, Elon Musk of this world, who himself has talked about interfering in British politics, let's not forget, they have open season on this. And what that is doing, it's also driving a new news cycle in the UK. So you've seen some, the rise of things like GB News, the way in which our general political Overton window has shifted so quickly and so fast and so polarised. We're becoming increasingly polarised. And I think you can only see that within the context of social media. And I think that's the important thing to think about as well. When you're thinking about interference, both domestic and international, often it's not about achieving a single political outcome. We want this one thing to happen. It's about achieving division and polarisation, because that just weakens societies, it weakens governments, it weakens the ability to do anything. And you end up having, as you've seen in the last few years here in the UK, increasingly angry conversations, increasingly angry arguments. And social media has really just absolutely supercharged it, and it does it at a fraction of the price. It does it for almost nothing, and our unwillingness to even have that conversation, to even grapple with that. And we need the culture secretary to really come out and talk about this stuff too. I think there's been a real resistance to, I've heard some of the comments that are just seem absolutely, we're not going to tell people what people should say, and so, well, it's not about that. It's about actually using legislation that already exists.
Yeah, and I mean, it sometimes feels like a lonely business, doesn't it? Pointing out that the polarity is the point. And most recent examples would include trying to portray London as some sort of crime-ridden hellhole, which adds to the sense of division, and of course is now being taken up by UK politicians who've appointed themselves as sort of latter-day Lord Haw-Haws. But a lot of these roads lead back to foreign interference. Almost all of them lead back originally to foreign interference. The problem, and I know you appreciate this, is that no one realises they've been a victim of it. Nobody thinks that their opinions are a result of, St. Petersburg bot farms interfering with their Facebook page in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, any more than somebody listening to this 100 miles outside London believes that the reason why they're convinced London is a crime-ridden hellhole is because of propaganda that's been punted by our enemies and taken up by some of our own journalists and politicians. I mean, it's a brilliant operation, isn't it, to be clear?
Well, the extent of it, the radicalization aspect of this, because what you do is you take these things that already exist, and that's what Russia did so well. Look at the 2016 presidential election. All this stuff now, we can never talk about Russia and Trump, but what's fascinating, if you look at what was happening, at some instances, Russian Facebook pages were running both pro and anti-Hillary Clinton protests next to each other. It was really clever, and they were kicking off. There was huge conflagrations. And all what you ended up there was just discord and division. So what you do is you take these nubs that already exist in our societies. There is always, we don't all agree with all of each other all the time, and you sit within them and you radicalize them and push them further and further, and that's exactly what's happened. And there seems to be a complete unwillingness on any of our parts to kind of want to sit down and go, okay, what's happened here, and how do we unspool this? And I think, unless we are willing as well to have that conversation about the role of big tech in our politics, all of this is going to be for naught as well. I think that is also a crucial part of this.